life, of course, nothing is nearly as neat and tidy.
Zach wrote the script during the beginning of the pandemic, so he would go down and write in the office and would come back like 5 hours later, having mustered up some new scene, and I wasn't allowed to touch or read it or like even just look at anything until it was finished. But we would talk through things, and we would plan where things would go, and obviously my position in this is that he is the director, and what he wants is that's literally, I mean, we are actors to just basically be there for them to mold, and then we come in and help kind of shape that. But I think it was really helpful us just talking through things. And then in terms of when I received the script, you know, the whole joy of coming to a script is that you get to fill in the gaps as an actor, and you get to fill out this role, which was already pretty much me. It was like written for me, so it sounded like me. And then just the little tweaks that make them real and don't just, they actually take it to the next level is when you actually start getting the movie ready and you're like, oh crap, what if we did this instead? And so it felt really natural and exciting, and for me it was my first stab at producing, and I loved it. I found it incredibly, I think I just felt it really relieving that it was actually something that I'd kind of been wanting to do or had kind of been doing on previous projects without really knowing. And knowing that I had fun with it, so that was great. And then of course going into the study of Alison and the study of what it is that she's going through, yeah, we both spoke to a numerous amount of people, and I spent some time with an ex-addict who is now an AA sponsor, and leads groups for young people. So it was really helpful just understanding, obviously, the physicalities and the pain, what goes through their minds, what the actual struggle is about. You can't make a movie like this without actually doing the work.
In 1998, I had just gotten out of college, and a young woman who I knew from high school told me what her job was, and she was a pharmaceutical rep. And she described to me how she got all this data from the doctors, and if she got them to increase their prescriptions for whatever she was selling, she got a bonus, and if they did enough, they got like a golf weekend. And she said part of her job was kind of flirting, and she'd bring the nurses sushi. And I just remember in 1998 thinking, this is so messed up. Like, this is how it works? This is legal? Now cut to this preposterously insane opioid crisis we have in the United States, and everyone who is figuring out this is how it was done. This is how drugs are sold, and what the Sackler family did to our country and the world. And it's just always stuck with me. And I read a few books about it, and I just always found it fascinating and wanted to write about it, because I was sort of angry about it and wanted to put it into something and to tell a very personal human story about one woman and what it did to her life.
Yeah, definitely, it's very relatable. I feel like you can almost see yourself in her. So yeah. And
you also see how quickly and easily it happens to someone. And I thought that amongst the many things I wanted to talk about in the film, I wanted to show how quickly it destroys someone's life, and not someone who's into drugs, or not someone who's going down or making those choices, someone who was prescribed it, and what can and does very often happen to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And it's also kind of ultimately a film about grief. That's a really present theme. But you blend humour with the tragedy, which offers a kind of lightness. But I wondered why you wanted to tell this story about grief in this way, with the kind of lightness, as well as we're never shying away from the tragedy of it.
Well, I think for two reasons. One, the times in my life when I've been in really depressed states and dealing with grief, I was so grateful for someone making a joke and the belly laugh that is so necessary to have a relief from it. And also I find, as a filmmaker, if you give the audience too much drama, it just feels too maudlin. It's hard to digest it. That's how I feel as an audience member. So what I tried to do was infuse it with humor. So just at a point when it feels quite intense, there is a release, and so you have an opportunity to laugh. So it's sort of mirroring my experience with real life grief, but also making the film hopefully digestible and enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Time keeps on coming.
Hi, Dan.
I've been all around.
I'm worried about you.
I want my life back. I want my child back.
I need help. I know.
What do you think this film has to say about the opioid crisis in America that's so, might help people understand the issue? Because I feel like in the UK especially, we don't always, it's such a huge, deadly problem in the States, and we don't necessarily appreciate that in the same way. So yeah, how do you think it kind of explains the issue that might help people understand it?
I think the best way to sum it up is it doesn't choose. It can happen to anyone. I think the worst thing to imagine is that this happens to a specific type of person from a specific type of family, or happen to catch onto this drug first, and so that, it doesn't matter. People get prescribed things, and their life can change, and it doesn't even have to necessarily be about that. It could be that you actually were in pain and you actually did come from an awful accident, and it affects everyone.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of following on from that, obviously the title of the film is A Good Person, and all these people, the characters in the film, are all going through their own battles, and it's their, it's kind of the cards they've been dealt. And what do you think is interesting about that kind of moral quandary, and what makes a good person, so to speak?
I think I've actually been explaining this to people when I've said that I was doing press for A Good Person. They were like, oh, and everyone says, oh, are you a good person? And I was like, no, she's not a good person, but she is a good person. I think good people can do bad things, and I think bad people can do bad things, but I think good people want to change, and good people don't want to hurt people. And I think that's what this movie is about, is wanting to change but being unable to accept guilt and accept fault. And in order to do that, you cannot change, you cannot go forward, because you need to admit that to yourself before you admit that to anyone else. And what does a good person mean? What is a good person? Exactly.
Yeah, that's true. And Florence is, as ever, just amazing in this. Just amazing at everything she does. Yeah. But did you always have her in mind for Alison? And then how closely did you work with her to develop the character throughout the process?
Well, I wrote it, of course, with Florence in mind. She was the lead from the get-go. And then I wrote this all through the pandemic and during lockdown, and then I finally did show it to her, and she liked it, and she gave me some really valuable notes, and then we kind of collaborated on it. And then, of course, the character sings 2 different songs in the film, and Florence, because she's a singer-songwriter, was able to write those songs in the voice of the character. So that was really incredible and a really wonderful way to collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And at the heart of this story is kind of a moral quandary. The title of the film is A Good Person. I just wonder, what do you think makes a good person? What do you think is kind of the answer to that dilemma that Alison's going through in this? Like, am I a good person at the end of it all?
Well, I think the film is about good people that have just befallen tragedy. And it's really about how they stand back up. I don't think the film sets out to judge who's good and who's bad. It's more about that these things can happen to anyone, and they happen every second to good people. And there's that saying there, but for the grace of God go I. I hope that the audience sees themselves in the film, and how this could either has or could be themselves.